Welcome to Working for Women, the Independent Women's Forum podcast, where we are changing the conversation about women and public policy for the better.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Hayes, and welcome to this edition of IWF's Working for Women podcast. I'm here with IWF's President, Carrie Lucas, to talk about IWF's new policy focus on flexible scheduling. Carrie, can you tell us what the latest trends in shift scheduling are and why our listeners should really care about this?
Yeah, thanks so much, Charlotte. For a long time, the American employers have used this idea of shift workers. And basically what a shift worker is, it's somebody who is hired to fill a job, and then somebody else comes and does that job too. So they kind of fit into a position. Other people will be plugged into that position so that their schedules end up not always being fixed. This affects a large share of the workforce works in these non-traditional, not working a 9-to-5 job, but rather being scheduled as working in shifts. So, that's happened for decades and decades now. But one of the new kind of innovations that businesses have been employing, in part because technology makes it easier for them to do so, is what's called just-in-time scheduling. This is where instead of being given your shift schedule weeks in advance, employers will say, okay, I want you to be available during these times. And on a condition of your employment, you have to be available during these times, but I'm only going to call you into your shift when I know that you are needed. So you can kind of imagine that this happens, if you've got a business that's kind of affected by, the seasons or by kind of an outside force, like whether the weather is good, it means that businesses might have a more or less staffing. And so they'll tell workers kind of at the very last minute to come in. So that's kind of the new innovation that's happened. And there's a lot of policymakers and workers trying to figure out what, if anything, to do about these trends and what it means for the American workforce.
Well, Carrie, how exactly are lawmakers responding to this so far?
Yeah, so it's interesting because you can lawmakers have looked at this and said, boy, this can create some problems for workers. It creates problems when a worker who has, particularly if you've got children, it means that if somebody says you have to come in and work kind of at the last minute, that can make it real hard for somebody to find childcare for their kids. It also means that sometimes workers will not get enough hours. If you're thinking you're going to get this many shifts in a given month, and then at the last minute your employer says, sorry, business has gone down, and you get canceled on, that can create real hardship for workers who are counting on making money for all those hours. But so lawmakers have said, we might crack down or kind of prevent people from having this kind of working arrangement or not allowing employers to do that.
How is this working out in real practice? Just a little bit more on that. You've hinted at it.
Yeah, so there's obviously these downsides for businesses. There's these downsides for workers, just like there's upsides for businesses. For businesses, it means that they can that they have fewer. They don't have to pay for as many idle hours. That they can control this idea. They don't have to employ staffers to man a shop when nobody's showing up because it's raining out, or waiting in line when customers aren't coming. It makes it easier for businesses to survive, and it's important. I think sometimes there's almost this when these discussions take place, there's a sense that it's kind of an us versus them. But actually, it's really important for workers, for businesses to do well too. If you are working for some kind of restaurant that is paying you to show up and there's nobody there, you're not going to have that job for long because that restaurant's not going to be open for long. So this just-in-time scheduling has upsides for both workers and for businesses and business owners themselves. But then, so now what's come in, I think lawmakers looked at it and said, boy, this isn't fair to workers. And they said, we're going to go ahead and, workers are are having some troubles, and it can be hard on them. So we're going to come in and create new regulations and say that businesses have to provide at least 2 weeks notice. This is the most typical. Here, we have different states have done different things, or different cities. We've had cities, Seattle and San Francisco and in New York, come along and create regulations that dictate the terms, kind of how employers can schedule their employees, saying you have to give at least 1 week notice, or 2 week notices, or pay some kind of penalty. Sometimes that penalty means you have to pay workers even if they don't show up, or if you schedule somebody last minute, you've got to pay them twice as much. But there's real problems with these. That sounds like, okay, that's great, that protects workers, but it doesn't always do it. And there was an interesting study that came out just before it came out of the University of Washington, I believe, in Washington, looking at what happens from these regulations, and it's kind of just what you would expect. A lot of employers are reacting to these new regulations by allowing less flexibility. Often it sounds like, and even how I've presented it today, is this idea that it's employers only responding to business needs and changing schedules at the last minute. But oftentimes those schedule changes are at the request of employees. If you got sick one day and or had something come up, had to take care of some personal problem, you might call your boss and say, "Hey, can you get this person? Can you get Betsy to fill in for me?" And the employer, if it's a good manager, would say, "Sure, let me see what I can do." And then employees are often willing to take over for a worker, get those extra hours. So as a result of these scheduling laws, it makes employers less likely to want to do that. Now, I should mention that these regulations, most of them anyway, have a provision that says, if it's because an employee is sick, there's a little more leeway. But still, they've created new headaches. All of a sudden, it has to be done in writing, and there has to be employees on a list that have volunteered to cover for sick workers. So it complicates it. And so these surveys show that, in fact, employers have started saying, I'm not going to accommodate flexibility requests from employees. And of course, the other way that human resource managers and those who are scheduling the shifts have reacted is to say, I'm going to schedule less shifts. I'm going to see how I can make sure that I'm doing with getting by with fewer workers or fewer positions. Just moving to a full-time workforce instead of more part-time workers kind of mitigates some of the risks of this. So that's bad news for a lot of people starting out.
Carrie, I'm sure all of these regulations, even if they don't work very well, are well-intended. But what are some better ways to make sure that this would work for employees?
It's interesting, Charlotte, because I think that's at the end of the day, I think that a lot of these regulations, whether we're talking about these scheduling regulations or minimum wage laws or even kind of the paid leave laws, all of the things that are trying to dictate or kind of make sure that that workers, particularly those with lower incomes, get benefits and get more benefits and are better compensated. They're certainly well intended, but they miss out on all of these kind of unintended consequences. We've seen from both minimum wage laws and paid leave laws and these scheduling laws that especially workers with the fewest skills, those who are just starting out and really need a foot in the door, it means fewer job opportunities for them, and it also means fewer hours for those who need it most. So I really think that the way it doesn't help anybody if the result of a new regulation is fewer opportunities for people who are trying to enter the workforce and get those first jobs. If you're going to make it so there's fewer jobs for them. So that's why I think we need to focus on getting rid of these regulations, allowing this kind of just-in-time scheduling to take place, but then focusing on making it easier for employers to create jobs overall, so that employees have better options. The best way to make sure that your employer treats you well is to have another job that you can say, if you don't give me, cleaning an employment contract or employment situation that makes sense for you. And employers do end up competing for workers. And it's not just at the upper, we know that people with higher incomes can demand better benefits and better employment situations. But even when it comes to shift workers and lower wage workers, it's still the best. Competition makes a big difference, and there's people who are employing those workers too, who really want and need a reliable workforce. So we want to make sure that there's actual job growth, so that people can find jobs that make sense for them. It's not perfect. There's always going to be people who are having to struggle with less than ideal situations, but I think that's the direction we need to head.
Carrie, this has been fascinating. Thanks so much for joining me. And thank you to our listeners who have taken time to listen to this very important discussion. For more information on this and other important topics, please visit us at iwf.org, where all issues are women's issues. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, or stop by iwf.org for similar content.